serving the media bias, I guess, just depends on which channel you watch.
The mainstream media has gone over the top.
Washington is broken.
They can't stand the truth, and apparently the news media can't stand the truth.
Media that affirms their own point of view.
I can't believe anything that they say. I just really can't.
I think that we need a different point of view other than the Republican and the Democratic Party.
The national power grid, a lot of people feel like it's there, it's big, it looks robust, but there are ways that the entire national grid could collapse.
A smart adversary is going to strike you at your most vulnerable, your most fatal point. It's the electric grid, the keystone of all of our critical infrastructures that supports our whole civilization.
Pull that out, you perhaps made a killing blow against the United States in the opening move.
Snipers stationed across the highway opened up, knocking out 17 giant transformers.
You're just asking for a small handful of people to take down power grids. It's just not that hard. And this is absolutely one of the easiest possible things you can do to drive urban areas into total chaos.
The speed with which our enemies are moving exceeds the speed with which our legislators are acting.
So how much time do we have? I think we're running out of time.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Laurie Dew. In October of 2013, For the Record aired a story that revealed how the American power grid is dangerously unguarded and highly vulnerable to an electromagnetic pulse attack known as an EMP. In that episode called Blackout, we examined how an EMP could be released from a nuclear device detonated at a high altitude. We showed how such a strike would be devastating to the country. Since we aired that story, we continue to investigate the vulnerabilities of the nation's power grid. We have uncovered other scenarios much less complex than an EMP strike that would be just as catastrophic. Here at The Blaze, we feel this is a subject that has been underreported by most news outlets. Therefore, we're committing a full hour to this topic as we join with our colleagues at Real News Investigates to bring you an in-depth look at the nation's unprotected electrical network. We will begin here at For the Record as we present Unguarded.
After 9/11, Congress ordered a series of studies on weapons of mass destruction. In 2004, the EMP Commission delivered a report on the threat of an electromagnetic pulse attack on the United States.
The EMP Commission published 5 reports, 3 were classified and 2 were unclassified. The 2 unclassified were in 2004 and 2008. They laid out a scenario where a very entry-level weapon in the 20 kiloton range was lobbed at not a very high altitude over Cincinnati, Ohio.
Michael Del Rosso is an engineer and Pentagon consultant. He has worked with the EMP Commission, and he has participated in confidential congressional briefings on nuclear threats to America.
And the reason they chose that target is because that weapon with the radius of line of sight at the altitude, which was a nominal altitude, would have covered 74.5% of all the electric generating capacity in the United States and 83% of the substations in the United States and the majority of the population.
Bill Graham, who was the chair, the one statement he made that I think needs to be remembered is EMP is one of a small number of effects that has existential consequences that could threaten the existence of the United States.
George Baker is Professor Emeritus of Applied Science at James Madison University. He sits on the Board of Advisors for the Congressional Task Force on National and Homeland Security.
The effects could be so widespread that, in effect, you'd have breakdown of governance. In Bill Graham's testimony, he thought that upwards of 50% of the population would die within the first year.
For the Record has learned that in 1995, a Russian think tank presented a report to the Russian army recommending the military align with rogue nations, sharing both weapons of mass destruction and missile technology.
There was testimony in 2004 by Soviet flag officers that they rather sheepishly said that technology for super EMP weapons had actually leaked out to North Korea and other rogue nations.
As reported by For the Record in 2013, a number of nations considered hostile to the U.S., including North Korea and Iran, have conducted missile tests consistent with launching an EMP strike.
I think that our potential adversaries in Iran and North Korea are extremely dangerous.
Dr. Peter Pry is the executive director of the Congressional Task Force on National and Homeland Security. He also served as a member of the Congressional EMP Commission and worked for the House Armed Services Committee.
Let's not forget, why did we have that nuclear crisis with North Korea back in February? Well, it was because they conducted their third illegal test of a nuclear weapon. And 3 months before that, just 3 months before that, they demonstrated the capability to make a nuclear EMP attack against the United States by orbiting their satellite in December 2012 on a trajectory consistent with making an EMP attack.
Since the late 1990s, Iran's Revolutionary Guard has performed several EMP-type tests with ballistic missiles. But in February 2014, for the first time, the Iranian Navy sent a fleet to America's maritime borders in the Atlantic Ocean, within striking distance, less than 15 miles off the U.S. coast.
This is a paradigm shifter, or what they call in the military an asymmetrical first strike. It is outside the realm of thinking of conventional fighting.
William Forstchen is an author and military historian. He has briefed members of Congress and military leaders on the threat of an EMP strike on American soil.
The warfare of the 21st century is going to increasingly, the first strike will be aimed at infrastructures, electrical distribution, command and control, which in turn creates civil chaos, but also shuts down our ability not only to communicate, but to get our food, water, medical supplies, what we know are the basic necessities of life. They're all dependent on electricity. Pull that out, even perhaps made a killing blow against the United States in the opening move.
Electromagnetic pulse is a real concern with the detonation of any weapon of mass destruction like a nuclear warhead.
General Charles Jacoby heads the U.S. Northern Command, the military force in charge of protecting the U.S. homeland. On March 13, 2014, during congressional testimony, Jacoby confirmed America's vulnerability to an EMP strike, specifically from the Gulf of Mexico.
Would you agree that that risk is highly worrisome?
Senator, I think it's worth us worrying about, and I don't think we know enough to describe the correct degree of risk, but it is sufficient risk that we should be considering it. And I would say that the most important thing we do is make sure that we're continuing to collect the intelligence that would warn us of EMP risk, and if an EMP risk was to increase.
You know, the bad guys have conceived the idea that you could win a war, not necessarily by going after adversaries' forces, but by going after the critical civilian infrastructures, the most important of which is the electric power grid that supports those military forces. It's in effect like hitting our central nervous system.
Gunmen stormed the PG&E Metcalf substation.
Snipers stationed across the highway opened up, firing over 100 rounds into the station and knocking out 17 giant transformers.
This is the most significant attack on the electric grid that's ever occurred in the United States.
In the early morning hours of April 16, 2013, after cutting a series of internet cables and phone lines, a group of up to 6 snipers using AK-47s unleashed a 20-minute volley of gunfire into a massive energy transmission substation near San Jose, California.
The fire from the AK-47s, which is the favorite sidearm of terrorists in rogue states, you know, was accurate, aimed fire. They knew just where to shoot at the transformers to cause maximum damage. Just knowing the idea that you have to attack transformers indicates that you're dealing with people who know what they're doing, because most people don't know what transformers are and why they're important.
It was immediately reported as vandalism by PG&E to the Department of Energy. And when we asked the Department of Energy for comment on this subject, they told us they were unavailable. And what I would like to know is, why would they not want to talk about this? It's almost been a full year after this incident.
Elizabeth Kreft is a major in the U.S. Air Force Reserves and the technology editor for The Blaze. Kreft has served as a Defense Legislative Fellow on the House Armed Services and Judiciary Committees, where she assisted in writing legislation focusing on protecting America's critical infrastructure.
The people deserve answers. The public deserve answers on what has been done in almost a year since San Jose was attacked to protect other substations, to protect this critical infrastructure.
The FBI continues to classify the attack as an act of vandalism. But in February 2014, John Wellinghoff, the former chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, went public with his concerns over the incident, telling the Wall Street Journal that the attack was the most significant incident of domestic terrorism involving the grid that has ever occurred.
Wellinghoff saw this as a practice run for a larger operation so that you could come back in a crisis or a war and attack a lot more substations and do it successfully. I think the operation was successful because they demonstrated that they could gain access to this, that they could quickly make an attack on these things, that they were able to elude the police.
I absolutely believe San Jose could have been a dry run. And I think it was an effective mission. So sometimes when people use that term dry run, they think, well, it was almost a half effort. No, I think it was a full effort by a terrorist organization to see what our response would be to a direct attack on one of our transformer substations.
U.S. FERC, Wellinghoff himself, I believe, brought in the guys who trained U.S. Navy SEALs. And they concluded that this was a professional job, that it was up to the standards that the U.S. Navy SEALs would use, and it's how they would attack.
These are not hard targets. These are very, very soft targets.
This man, who we'll call Mark, is a U.S. intelligence officer and former Navy SEAL. He is not permitted to reveal his identity on camera, but agreed to be interviewed because he feels Americans need to understand this threat to the nation.
These are generally in remote areas that have just a fence around them, maybe a camera system. You see them all the time. You drive past them every day. They're not hard at all to actually take down.
A San Jose substation, by the way, services the Silicon Valley. You could have had cascading failures that would have blacked out perhaps the whole west coast of the United States.
I would think that a lot of people could probably take down Manhattan when it comes to power grids. You're just asking 15, small handful of people to take down a power grid is just not that hard.
Do you know how vulnerable we are as Americans? When you think about that? When the Japanese attacked us in 1941, they had to use 6 carriers and 300 strike planes. When the terrorists hit us on 9/11, 4 planes. Now we're talking about just a couple hundred bullets could create the same level of damage.
Look at weapons of mass destruction across the board, or weapons of mass chaos across the board. A lot of things require a lot of skill. This is not one of those. This is absolutely one of the easiest possible things you could do to drive urban areas into total chaos.
In addition to the threats posed by terrorists and rogue nations, our electric grid is also susceptible to devastation from natural causes. Massive solar flares released by the sun can cause harmful EMP effects on our grid. The largest ever recorded solar storm, known as the Carrington event, occurred in 1859, well before the dawn of electricity in America. But on March 18, 2014, NASA researchers reported that the sun produced a Carrington-like storm back in July of 2012 that missed affecting the Earth by just 9 days. Had the geomagnetic storm hit our planet, researchers report it would have caused trillions of dollars in damage and could have knocked out power grids across the globe for 4 to 10 years. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Tonight we've shown you how vulnerable the U.S. power grid is to destruction from a wide range of threats. Given the risk for catastrophic consequences, we asked our sources, who is in charge of securing our grid? The answer to that question is not as simple or as definitive as most Americans would hope.
The national power grid, a lot of people feel like it's there, it's big, it looks robust, but there are ways that it's possible the entire national grid could collapse.
There are 3 key networks that deliver electricity in the United States. They are the Western, Eastern, and Texas grids. Together, they are comprised of more than 160,000 miles of transmission lines and 55,000 electric substations.
Perhaps one of the worst parts about it, though, is that you really only need to take out one of the grids to cause a national catastrophe.
Where the power is actually created at the power plant, there's a transformer that increases the voltage so it can actually travel a long distance. And then there's a transformer that steps down that voltage so it can actually be sent to your house.
An extra high voltage transformer, or what is called an EHV transformer, it's the foundation stone of our modern civilization. These EHV transformers are to our civilization what aqueducts and roads were to the Roman Empire. Our society can't operate without it.
But experts tell For the Record that EHV transformers are the most unprotected critical infrastructure assets in the nation.
They are one of the most technologically difficult things to manufacture in the modern world. Every EHV transformer plays a unique role in the grid. It's custom made for the grid, and the windings actually have to be done by hand. They're hand built. And while we exported the technology for the electric grid to the world, like so many things, like the airplane, like the automobile, we used to build them and we exported these things to the world, but now we have to import them from overseas. And there's only 2 countries in the world that build them for export purposes, South Korea and Germany. And it takes 18 months, a year and a half, just to build one. And so that's why, someone armed with a sniper rifle, attacking the transformers at San Jose, that if they were to use, simple technologies to destroy these transformers, it could strike at the heart of our civilization.
In response to security risks exposed by the San Jose attack, FERC conducted a classified study in 2013. According to the Wall Street Journal, that study revealed alarming results.
And they didn't want the report publicized because our vulnerability is so great, where they concluded that an attack on just 9 out of 55,000 substations, that if you knew which 9 substations to attack, you could basically plunge the whole United States into a blackout that would last 18 months.
On March 7th, 2014, FERC issued an order to the power industry stressing the need to address security risks at America's electrical substations. But experts remain skeptical.
FERC doesn't have the legal authority to compel the electric power industry to do anything. It can ask for a plan, but it doesn't have the regulatory powers that are common in the federal government for all other critical infrastructures.
It's the electric utilities under the banner and leadership of NERC, which is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. It's a industry consortium, is the only group that can write the standards.
Historically, when NERC has issued orders, they haven't been followed. It used to be the trade association for the electric power industry, and in reality, it's still a lobby for the electric power industry.
Here's an organization that's funded by the power stations, and yet they're going to, enforce or be the regulatory arm around what is the security for these structures.
It is the corruption of our federal system, a system that answers to whichever lobbyist can throw the most money, and currently FERC and organizations like that are throwing a lot of money blocking what we, the people, need for our protection.
I think the first thing that needs to take place is less talk. We've had a lot of talk, we've had a lot of studies. We need to really sit down and go, okay, from a government perspective, what is the standard that we want to be upheld across all our substations?
In February 2013, the White House released a presidential policy directive aimed at strengthening the security of critical infrastructure. That directive assigned the task of securing the grid to the Department of Energy.
DOE is, I would call them a dangling modifier. It's really not clear. When we talk to NERC about protecting the grid, they will say DOD should be responsible. But then when we talk to DOD and ask them, well, who should be responsible, they tend to hand wave over to DHS. And then when you talk to DHS folks, somehow they say, well, DOE needs to be involved. But it's one of these situations where there's a lot of different agencies that have some piece of the action, but nobody is really in charge.
While the bureaucrats point fingers, the nation's grid remains dangerously vulnerable, despite the fact that basic protections from even the worst threats come at a relatively low cost.
We found, that whether you're talking about cyber attack or kinetic attacks like sniper fire or nuclear EMP attack, it really boils down to a handful of vulnerable nodes that the bad guys go after. All of these things go after the EHV transformers. The Congressional EMP Commission estimated that to protect the entire national electric grid against the worst case scenario, a nuclear EMP attack would cost us $2 billion. $2 billion. That's what we give away every year in foreign aid to Pakistan.
If you amortize that over 20 years, a typical customer would be paying the price of a postage stamp each year to protect these heavy-duty transformers.
If it stopped a tornado from hitting a city and destroying the people or creating that chaos, we would. If you just take the tornado out of the equation, just put 4 or 5 people, and they're going to create the same type of chaos in that area. That's not a concern right now, and I find that very hard to understand.
We have a capital investment which not only involves trillions of dollars of infrastructure, but over 300 million American lives. And we're not willing to spend a small fraction of a percentage of 1% to ensure safety. That is not only short-sighted, it is criminal.
While it's unclear which U.S. government agency is ultimately responsible for securing the grid, nations like Great Britain and Israel have specific individuals assigned to making sure their domestic infrastructures are protected. The Department of Energy declined to be interviewed or provide comment for this story. Representatives from FERC also declined to appear on camera or provide a statement. But on March 20th, FERC Commissioner Tony Clark released a series of statements on grid security on the agency's website. Specifically, he said, the threats and their potential scenarios are almost limitless. At the same time, the amount of money and resources that could be expended attempting to bring the chance of every threat to zero are also limitless, all of which would result in an electric grid that Americans likely would be unable to afford. We'll be right back. Welcome back. On February 27, 2014, in light of the San Jose power station attack, the Department of Homeland Security Fusion Center in New Jersey released a bulletin mentioning at least 6 reports of suspicious activity at electrical facilities in the state over the past year. The report also mentioned additional incidents in Arizona and Arkansas. As we mentioned before the break, multiple federal agencies declined to speak to For the Record regarding the vulnerability of America's electric grid. But one agency, DHS, supplied us with a statement which says in part that the agency works closely with its partners in the energy industry to promote and support voluntary security assessments, an approach the experts in our show tonight warned isn't enough to protect our nation's dangerously vulnerable power grid. For more information on tonight's episode, please visit our show page at theblaze.com/fortherecord. Coming up